They said the Zerun never miss. That's fine, neither do I. That was the last thing I said before the line went dead. One clean shot took out the Zerun scout just as it crested Ridge Theta. Then the comms dissolved into static. No signal pings from Theta 9, just the steady whine of white noise in my ear and the low whistle of wind carrying dust across the rocks. I remember silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind that follows sudden violence and doesn't bother warning you before it breaks again. We had dropped onto K-12, one of the outer dust moons of Juno's reach, barely 36 hours earlier. The mission brief had described it as a clean recon sweep, routine, low-risk, minimal contact. Ghost moon, they called it. Nothing but sand, wind, and derelict mining infrastructure from before the Union pulled out. Command didn't expect any contact. They were wrong, and we paid for it. The Zerun didn't just move into the area. They had fortified. Tunnels, kill boxes, ambush points carved out of collapsed shafts and overrun mining towers. They didn't just arrive, they embedded. I was on overwatch duty when they hit us. It was 3:40 standard. I lay prone across the ridge above the collapsed dig site, observing low-level thermal patterns when the air changed. It was not the weather nor the wind, something else. The atmosphere shifted, like the whole plateau tensed up. Then came the first scream. Mackenzie, I think, or Ramos, it was hard to tell over the burst of weapons fire that followed, short, panicked, and already out of sync with our SOP. They were in the middle of a full squad pincer before the first order could be called. We'd walked into a trap that had been waiting months to be sprung. The Zerun don't rush in like maniacs. They don't scream or waste energy. They appear, coordinated, silent, and fast. Their active camouflage doesn't shimmer, it just is, like they're cut from the dust itself. By the time you register them, one of them is already on top of you. It came from behind the ridge, leaping from a concealed perch. I heard nothing until the weight landed behind me, and the crunch of dust under clawed feet gave it away. I rolled hard, my shoulder cracked against rock as my rifle went spinning. The Zerun surged forward, arm blades extended, a hiss of breath filtered through its mask. It moved with precision, cold and controlled. I drew my sidearm mid-roll and fired 3 times. The first round shattered its mask, the second went wide, the third punched clean through its lower jaw and out the back of its skull. It collapsed over me, heavier than it looked, and that weight, plus momentum, was enough to send both of us tumbling off the ridge. I hit hard, slid down a powder-slicked incline of lunar dust and broken metal until gravity finally gave up on me, and I dropped into darkness. I woke up in a collapsed maintenance shaft, half buried under the alien's corpse and a tangle of rusted scaffolding. Armor integrity 54%, oxygen levels stable for now. Primary weapon, damaged optics cracked, sidearm 1 magazine, explosives 1 frag, 1 flare, drone, online damaged, still loyal. I called it Dusty. My ribs burned, my shoulder throbbed, my squad was gone, comms were dead. Dusty's sensor pinged faint movement above me, heat signatures moving slow. The Zerun were sweeping the area, likely confirming kills, cleaning up what was left of Theta 9. They thought they got everyone, but they were wrong. It took 30 minutes to dig out and crawl free of the shaft. I emerged at the base of a collapsed comms tower a few kilometers from the original ambush point. The sun here never truly rose, just hovered at the edge of twilight, casting everything in shades of copper and gray. Perfect conditions for ghosts, perfect conditions for snipers. I rigged my broken drone sensor feed to scan for pulses, set up in the crumbling remains of a terraforming scaffold, and waited. It didn't take long. The Zerun scout emerged over the far ridge, classic hunting pattern leading a search pair. It moved low and quiet, sweeping with a pulse reader in one clawed hand and a weapon in the other. Its body shimmered faintly as the adaptive cloak recalibrated to dust density. But the shimmer gave it away. I lined up my shot from within the shadow of a broken vent shaft, adjusted for wind, and exhaled slowly. The moment the shimmer passed between two corroded beams, I fired. The round took it high in the chest. It dropped instantly, cloak sputtering. Its companion never even saw me. "Hold down," I whispered. "Plenty more where that came from." That was the first. The others wouldn't be far behind. But now they knew someone was still breathing. And I intended to keep it that way, not to hide. To hunt. I spent the next few hours doing what snipers do best, watching, waiting, breathing slow enough that even the dust settled around me like I wasn't there. From the top of the scaffold, I had a clear view across what used to be a mining complex, now reduced to rusted struts, crumbling walls, and sand-covered wreckage. The wind never stopped here. It dragged razor-fine dust in low sheets across the open ground, making every shape shift and blur just enough to fool the eye. That was the danger. The Zaroon didn't move like soldiers. They didn't take cover or march in formation. They glided, cloaked and silent, threading between currents of wind and shadow like they belonged to the terrain itself. They didn't announce themselves and didn't make mistakes, but after that first kill they were being cautious. That meant I had time to prepare. Time was something I could work with. I found my way to what was left of the mining depot. Most of it had collapsed, but deep inside the structure a few systems still ran on backup power. The motion sensors were fried and half the control panels were melted slag, but some of the old conduit lines remained live, enough to build something ugly. The trap was simple, a tripline using a fallen tension cable anchored under a rusted support strut, set to release a weakened column that would drop a 3-ton slab of steel into the corridor below. For bait, I reprogrammed a working access panel to emit a steady diagnostic ping, subtle enough to seem like a glitch, loud enough for any passing Zaroon to investigate. It wasn't elegant. It didn't need to be. It just had to make noise and kill hard. I crawled up into a broken vent shaft 2 levels above and settled into position. Dusty hover just outside the hall's entrance, feeding me heat signatures. The moment the first blip appeared, my pulse slowed. The Zaroon moved with practiced grace, legs barely disturbing the powder on the floor. Its thermal pattern shifted like oil, colors blooming as it approached the signal. It paused just before the panel, tilted its head slightly, and reached out. The moment its foot hit the cable, the whole corridor groaned, then buckled. Steel screamed. Gravity did the rest. The slab dropped like a guillotine, smashing the corridor in a single violent burst of metal and dust. The noise rolled out through the complex like thunder in a grave. Dusty pinged once, clean hit. 2, I muttered, checking the charge on my sidearm. Not a bad start. They didn't waste time responding. I picked up movement within 15 minutes. 2 contacts at first, then 3, spreading out, sweeping in a low arc through the outer perimeter. They were hunting properly now, moving in coordinated layers, trying to force me into open ground. I knew the pattern. It was smart and efficient. They wanted me tired, cornered, and off balance. I moved before they could finish the box. The old relay field at the ridge's edge offered a better kill zone. Flat terrain, tall structures, and scattered debris that still held shape under the dust. Broken towers made for perfect high ground, and if I could push the Zaroon into exposed positions, I could start thinning them out. I reached the first tower after 10 minutes of crawling through a trench lined with solar plates and bent rebar. Climbing it wasn't easy, my shoulders still burned with every motion, but I made it up and dropped to my belly across a rusted beam. The field stretched out before me, littered with broken panels and collapsed relay dishes, dusty marked heat signatures approaching from the northwest, 3 of them moving in tactical spread. The lead Zaroon carried itself differently. Taller, heavier torso, subtle armor markings around the neck and shoulders that shimmered with reflected light. A commander, maybe. It stopped at the edge of the relay field and crouched, scanning the terrain with a motion tracker. Behind it, the other 2 advanced slowly, covering angles with weapon arms drawn. I tracked the lead through my scope, adjusting for wind shear and distance. The reticle settled just below the throat plate. I waited for the rhythm of their movement. 1 breath, 2. The shot broke the silence like glass. The first round punched through the leader's upper chest. The second Zeradun reacted fast, dropping low and raising its weapon, but it was still exposing its side. My follow-up shot caught it just beneath the ribs, sending it tumbling into a fallen dish mount. All 2 went down, 1 escaped. I exhaled and slid back behind the beam, letting the echoes carry away. Dusty chirped twice. Confirmed. Still not learning, I said. Or maybe you're just running out of ideas. The bodies yielded little. Ammunition was useless to me, and most of the gear was fused into their carapaces. But one of their cloaking modules had survived the impact mostly intact. The power core was damaged beyond repair, but I slipped the module into a pouch on my belt. If I could pull the pulse signature from it, I might be able to fake a few tricks later. I headed south, toward the ravine, to regroup. My shoulder was stiffening again and the adrenaline was starting to burn out. I still had high ground to fall back to, and another few shots in my rifle. I hadn't needed the frag grenade yet, which meant I still had options. The ravine was narrow, shielded from the wind, with an overturned drill hauler wedged between the rock walls. I slipped inside the rusted shell, wedged my rifle beside me, and activated a low-burst scan through Dusty. His sensors were degrading, but he could still run short sweeps every 15 seconds. I ate half a ration bar, forced myself to drink, and checked my vitals. Armor integrity was holding, blood loss was under control, pain was manageable. 4 more left. 8 total. If they were sending full squads, I'd be halfway through them now. That thought settled like a weight against my chest. Not fear, not fatigue. Just the sharp pressure of knowing this wasn't over, not yet. I set Dusty's sweep to passive, leaned my head back against the cold frame of the hauler, and tried to rest. I don't know how long I was out, 30 minutes, maybe less, but I came awake fast, hand already moving to the rifle. Dusty chirped once, not a false ping. I kept still and let my breathing slow, let the sensor map scroll across my HUD like blood in water. 1 contact 4 meters out, too close for comfort, too far for safety. I slid my hand toward the stock, fingers wrapping the grip, and whispered under my breath, "All right, round 2, let's dance." The contact moved slow, either cautious or confident. It didn't matter which. I stayed motionless, body pressed flat against the inner hull of the old drill hauler. Dusty hovered low at my side, sensors sweep pulsing once every 2 seconds, feeding thermal feedback directly into my HUD. 1 Zaroon. Not cloaked, nor sprinting, just moving deliberately, blade limbs drawn, body low, scanning the narrow ravine with surgical intent. I counted 3 seconds between steps, not with the rhythm of a hunter, someone who thought the fight was already won, sweeping the room for confirmation. They always underestimate us. I waited until it stepped past the shattered axle near the hauler's front end, right where the light from the dust clouds bent unnaturally around the ridge. I shifted my weight slightly, slow enough not to disturb the gravel beneath me, and brought the rifle to my shoulder. The shot was close, too close for comfort, but not too close to miss. The round punched through its upper torso at a downward angle, shattering armor and igniting something beneath. The Zaroon didn't even scream. It dropped to its knees, spasming for a half second before collapsing sideways in a hiss of smoke and curling steam. Dusty pinged once, short and sharp. Target neutralized. 5. That left 3 of them. I knew better than to assume their numbers were fixed. Zaroon kill squads were not flexible by design. They sent 8 with commanders adjusting loadouts as needed. I'd counted 5 corpses with some degree of confidence, but 1 had been blown to pieces by the gravity trap, and another had disappeared into the relay wreckage after I shot it, possibly dragged off by its squad mates. I crawled out from the hauler and took a knee, scanning the ridgeline. The wind had shifted again, slower now, but with heavier particles in it. My visor dimmed slightly as the HUD adjusted for fine particulate interference. That meant a storm front was coming. Good news and bad news. Good. The Zaroon would have to slow down their movement, just like I would. Bad. My gear wouldn't last through another full night out here. The scope on my rifle was beginning to stutter. Small flickers of static around the edges, like it was having trouble keeping sync with the targeting interface. My HUD highlighted the error in red. Optic alignment degraded, manual correction required. In other words, my shots were no longer guaranteed. I tapped Dusty twice and opened his control panel, hoping to reroute his backup sensors into my scope. He buzzed weakly, spinning twice in the air before leveling off and flickering back into low power mode. "Hang in there, buddy," I said. "3 more dance, then we go home." I climbed out of the ravine and made my way back toward the central ridge, where the mining tower cast a broken shadow over the landing zone. According to the original op brief, this area had been used for staging equipment before the terraforming process failed. The towers were hollow, filled with stairwells and collapsed piping, and most importantly, they echoed like hell. That gave me an idea. I couldn't outgun what was left of the kill squad, but I could still outthink them. I made my way into the structure, climbing 3 levels through a series of rusted ladders and narrow crawl spaces. Every step echoed against corroded steel. I needed that. I needed noise. Once inside, I dragged loose piping across the floor, scattered old tools into corners, and adjusted debris piles to act as sound decoys. I set Dusty on a slow orbit around the second floor, relaying looped thermal patterns across 2 angles. It would look like I was pacing. Injured, maybe panicked. Classic bait. Then I climbed to the top, settled into position just behind a shattered ventilation grate, and waited. They came in as expected. First one, fast and coordinated, angled entry from the west stairwell and the north wall. The second arrived seconds later, sliding low through a breach in the outer hull. They didn't announce themselves, but I'd rigged the space with just enough debris to give away movement. Shifting shadows, displaced dust, a flicker of motion in a metal shard that caught light wrong. The first Zaroon stepped past the staircase, head tilting toward Dusty's false thermal signal. I waited for the angle. The second one swept its blade low, scanning left, still no line of sight. The third moved directly beneath my perch. That was the one I took. I fired down through the vent grate, the muzzle flash lighting the space like lightning. The round tore through its shoulder and chest and punched through the head of the second one behind him, launching it into a support beam with a metal scream. The third one moved instantly, no panic, just cold reaction. But I was already gone, sliding along a maintenance ledge toward a secondary exit shaft. Their return fire shattered the vent behind me, sending shrapnel sparking against the walls, but I was out of their arc before the second volley. He didn't pursue immediately, which meant he was starting to get scared. I hit the ground floor and rolled, armor plates screaming in protest. The impact jarred my ribs hard enough to blur my vision. I took cover behind a fuel processor and forced myself to breathe slow, counting each inhale through gritted teeth. Dusty's feed buzzed, grainy but still functional. 2 left and they knew where I was now. The next fight wouldn't be tactical, it wouldn't be clever. It would be close, fast, and brutal. My ammo count was down to 4 rounds. My sidearm was dry. The frag grenade was still tucked into my belt, but I'd been saving that for the right moment. Not just a reaction. I checked my vitals. Blood pressure rising, shoulder showing minor nerve degradation, pain meds wearing off. I smiled anyway, because they hadn't killed me yet, because I was still on my feet, and because if I had to die here, I would make damn sure the last thing those Zaroons saw was a human with empty mags and no fear in her eyes. The storm hit harder than I expected. I heard it before I saw it. A deep, steady thrumming that rolled across the plains like distant artillery, broken and irregular. Dust began to churn upward in thick, clawing spirals, and within minutes, the pale light from Juno's fractured sun vanished behind a curtain of swirling grit. My HUD dimmed automatically, switching to fallback filters as static laced across the screen. Visibility dropped to a handful of meters. The world turned to shadow and noise. I didn't panic. I'd seen worse conditions in worse places, but this was close. I stripped down to essentials. Anything non-critical got left behind in a collapsed alcove just outside the tower. Empty ration packs, cracked tools, my last med applicator. I checked the seals on my rifle, did a full status sweep on Dusty, and toggled his sensors into close-range pulse tracking. He was struggling. Interference from the storm was pushing his systems into minimal functionality, but the heartbeat sensor still worked. Barely. That was all I needed. I rerouted my own biometrics through the low-profile module in my suit and activated false signature mode, scrambling my pulse to throw off anything tracking via heartbeat alone. It was an old trick normally used for stealth infiltration, but it worked just as well for staying alive when someone else was hunting by rhythm. The trade-off was no small thing. With the signal scrambled, I wouldn't be able to rely on friendly identification markers, and more importantly, I'd lose my own sync to Dusty's heartbeat radar. I was cutting my visibility and awareness at the same time I was diving into near-total darkness, but the alternative was letting him find me first, and I couldn't afford that. I moved slow through the corridor, one hand brushing the curved interior of the mining tower's lower level, the other gripping the rifle tight against my side. My boots barely scraped the floor. Each step became deliberate, measured in centimeters, not strides. The wind outside howled across the shattered windows, turning every metallic creak into something primal and wrong. Inside, the air was still, too still. I moved by memory and instinct, keeping my body low to the ground, breath shallow. My HUD was almost useless, filled with static blur and broken signal returns. Dusty hovered behind me, sending out micropulses, each one returning with less clarity than the last. And then, finally, he caught something. A faint return, weak, moving. 7 meters, closing, slow. I dropped flat, letting the dust settle across my armor, holding my breath as I focused on the signal. It was coming in at an angle, looping the far corridor. I hadn't heard it yet, but I could feel it. Heavy steps, deliberate, like boots crunching stone, but smoother. Zerun armor was fast when it needed to be, but this one wasn't rushing. This one was searching. Dusty pinged again, then went silent. Too much interference. He went into passive mode, flickering red once before his optics shut down completely. I was on my own. The scrape came from behind me. I turned just as a shadow moved through the edge of the hall. No shimmer, no cloak, just the raw silhouette of a Zeruen elite, heavier than the others, limbs plated in dull segmented armor, eyes glowing faintly through the dust. His profile was broader, his gait slower. This wasn't a scout. This was command. Reinforced carapace, surgical weapon limbs. No wasted motion. He was hunting with experience, not arrogance. I had seconds to react. I moved sideways, rolling behind a fractured support beam, but he had already seen me. A burst of motion followed, clean, brutal, silent. His blade arm lashed out, catching the corner of the beam and shearing it in half as I scrambled backward across the floor, rifle raised. I didn't fire. Not yet. Too close, too fast. The next strike came even quicker, his upper limbs extending outward as he drove toward me, trying to corner me against the wall. I ducked, barely avoiding the hook of his right blade, and slammed my shoulder into his torso as hard as I could. It was like hitting a wall, but the impact disrupted his posture, forcing him to stagger. I dropped the rifle, grabbed the combat knife from my belt, and drove it up toward the gap in his underarm plating. He caught my wrist mid-strike. His grip felt mechanical, not just strong, but engineered to break bones. Pain flared through my arm as he twisted it downward and threw me into the wall. I hit hard. My vision flashed white, then narrowed into a tunnel of dust and blood and motion. I tasted copper. My side screamed where my ribs had taken the worst of the impact. I reached blindly, hands sweeping across the ground until I touched something small, cold, and familiar. The frag. I didn't think. I just pulled the pin and rolled it toward his feet. He saw it too late. The detonation ripped the corridor apart in a narrow arc, fire and pressure blowing out toward the open chamber. My armor took most of the heat, but the concussion still threw me against the far bulkhead like a rag doll. The Zaruan flew backward into a collapsed vent system, slamming into the grating with a dull crack. I lay still, chest heaving, helmet half cracked. My HUD was dark, no systems, no vitals, no alerts, just the high-pitched whine of silence. Then movement. He wasn't dead. He was limping now, but still upright, sparks trailing from his shoulder, his mask half melted, one optic gone. He moved slower, more deliberately, but the fury in his stride had not faded. I reached for my rifle, dragging it to me like it weighed 50 kilos. I couldn't see the reticle and the scope was shattered. There was one round left in the chamber. That was all I needed. I leaned against the wall, pulled the rifle to my chest, and waited. The Zaroon closed the distance without a word. No final insult, no battle cry, just grim, unstoppable motion. I let him step into range, then I fired. The shot hit just below his throat, right through the exposed gap in his armor. He staggered once, then dropped to his knees, then to the floor. I didn't move for a long time after that. Dust swirled around us in slow curling patterns. The wind outside screamed past the tower's remains, and in the distance, somewhere beyond the storm, light broke through. Not warmth, but clarity. I let my head fall back against the wall, closed my eyes, and triggered the emergency beacon on my suit. If the signal made it through the interference, maybe someone would come. And if not, I'd earned the right to rest here, because they'd said the Zaroon never missed. They hadn't met me. The beacon pulsed in steady intervals, blinking green on my forearm display. That was a good sign. The dust storm had thinned just enough for the signal to punch through the interference. Now all I had to do was stay alive long enough to be found. Easier said than done. My ribs were fractured. My shoulder wasn't responding properly. I could feel a deep throb behind my eyes, the kind that says you've lost more blood than your body is willing to admit. Dusty was offline, completely inert now, curled into a tight ball of scorched metal and melted optics where I'd dropped him before the last fight. Still, I sat upright, rifle across my lap, helmet off. I wasn't going to be found lying down. Not after everything. It took them 6 hours to reach me. The dropship came in low, its silhouette cutting through the last edge of the storm like a blade. It settled 20 meters out, kicking up dust in wide spirals as the engines cycled down. The side door opened with a hydraulic hiss, and 3 Terran Marines stepped out, fully armored, rifles drawn, moving like they expected resistance. When they saw me, alive, sitting upright with my unit flag jammed into the dirt beside me, they froze. One of them lowered his weapon slowly, visor locking on mine. Jesus. Command said we were on body recovery. I raised a hand, barely, and pointed toward the mining tower behind me. Bodies are there, I said. 8 of them. Zaroon, all dead. The lead Marine stepped forward, cautious but curious. You're Corporal Rourke, right? Recon Theta 9? Last one, I said, nodding. He looked at the tower again, then at the broken drone beside me, then down at the dusty kill marks etched into my rifle stock. 5 scratches. The 6th was fresh, scraped in with the tip of my boot. They loaded me onto the evac shuttle and started treating my wounds mid-flight. I only half listened to the chatter, something about extraction priority being bumped up, something about command wanting a full sit rep immediately. I let them talk. They hadn't been here. They hadn't seen what it took. Instead, I sat in silence, staring out the shuttle window at the shrinking outline of the dust moon below. 2 days later, I stood in front of a field operations panel on orbiting station Venris with 4 high-ranking officers on the other side of the glass. Medical sensors wrapped around my chest, bandages coated my arms, my hair was still matted with red grit from K-12. The officer in the middle, a general, stiff-backed and tight-jawed, asked the obvious question. How did one recon sniper take out an entire Zaroon kill squad, Corporal? I considered the question. The honest answer was messier than they probably wanted. I could have told them about Dusty, about the scaffolds and traps and listening to the rhythm of my own heart until I couldn't hear anything else. I could have explained how I used their own tactics against them, how I got lucky, how I didn't sleep, how I didn't eat, how I decided that if I was going to die on that moon, I was going to take as many of them with me as I could. But instead, I just looked him in the eye and said, "They made the mistake of thinking we scare easy." He didn't smile, but he nodded once. Then he handed me a datapad. "There's something else." He slid it across the table. We reviewed recovered drone footage, sensor logs, biometrics. I scanned the screen. What I saw made my blood go cold. Zaroon kill squads always deploy in packs of 8. That's doctrine. It's what we train for. It's what intel confirms. But the data was wrong. There had been 9. The 9th signal had shadowed me the entire time. Watching, never engaging, never interfering, just tracking my movements, relaying them to someone else. It had never been about the ambush, it had been a test. Later that night, alone in my bunk, I watched the logs again, frame by frame. In the middle of the worst moments, there were flickers. Movement just outside camera view, reflections where there should have been none. Heat patterns too far away to mean anything. I should have died on that moon. But someone or something had made sure I didn't, whether it was curiosity, respect, or planning for something worse. I didn't know, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The next day, they pinned a commendation on my uniform and shipped me out to a quieter post. Something about ambassador security detail, easy work, good hours. I didn't argue, but I kept the rifle. I repaired Dusty as much as I could, rebuilt him from spare parts. He can't track heartbeat signals anymore, but he still follows me around the hangar like a lost bird. I don't sleep much these days, not because of nightmares, but because I know that somewhere out there, that 9th Zaroon is still watching, and maybe next time, it won't just be a test. Until then, I've got rounds chambered, and I'm still breathing. They said the Zaroon never miss. That's fine, neither do I.